Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is kind of the Republican response to what's been going on here. All of us are members of the delegation that is headed by House Speaker Pelosi, and there are 6 Republican members of Congress on this delegation. And when we go down the table, I would like to ask each of my colleagues to give their name, their state, and their committee assignments in the Congress so that you can all see what we do on this issue in the United States House of Representatives. I'm Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin. I am currently the ranking Republican Party member of the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. In the past, I was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and the chairman of the Science Committee over the last 12 years. And I'm kind of a veteran of the climate change wars in that Speaker Gingrich named me as the head of the delegation to the Kyoto negotiations, and I've been to several COPs since Kyoto. Let me say at the outset that one of the things that Europeans have been interested in is the American political process. The Waxman-Markey bill is not a done deal. It passed the House of Representatives by only 7 votes. There were 7 Republicans that voted in favor of it and 44 Democrats that voted against it. The bill has been in the Senate since the end of June of last year. It has not been scheduled for action, and I think it is safe to say that it will have difficulty getting the 60 votes that are needed in the Senate to pass it. If it does pass, it will be in a considerably altered form from what was passed by the House of Representatives, which will necessitate a second vote in the House. And it will be very difficult for the Democratic majority in an election year to muster the votes to get it passed through the House of Representatives. I want to make a couple of points on the merits and what is going on here. First of all, any type of huge increases in energy taxes are a job killer. The American economy is hurting. The #1 job of the Congress, in my opinion, and that of all of my colleagues here, is to create new jobs and to get us out of the global recession that the whole world is suffering under. So this is a step backwards. Secondly, the text of the draft treaties that have been circulated here have no mention at all of intellectual property rights protection. The key to solving this issue on a long-term basis is not a cap-and-trade system, because under cap-and-trade, people buy offsets, and those who are developing their economies end up getting a lot of the money to emit more in terms of electrifying rural areas in places like China and India. So technology is the key, and the only way to get the capital necessary to develop new technologies is through vigorous protection of intellectual property rights. And this is critical for both America and Europe, because that's where most of the technologies are developed. And essentially what the draft treaty that is being discussed here does is to give the technology to everybody in the world without paying for it, and that will result in nobody putting up the capital to develop those new technologies, so we won't have that technology to give away. The final point I'd like to make is that yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Secretary of State Clinton put $100 billion on the table to talk about paying developing countries to clean up their emissions. The United States has a huge federal budget deficit today. There are a lot of concerns that there will either be a lot of inflation in the United States or that we will end up having the inflation being so high that it would not be possible to pay back that debt. I don't see the Congress voting for this money because simply our job is to take care of matters at home and to tell our voters and our taxpayers that they should put up a good part of the $100 billion basically to send to third world countries overseas is not the way to get reelected. And it all goes back to the issue is that in order for any type of a climate change treaty to be acceptable, it has got to be politically feasible. And in our country, we have a considerably different political system than most of the other countries in the world, including all of the countries in Europe. And with this different political system, there certainly is a lack of sensitivity on the part of many people, including some in America, that the opposition party has got considerable power. And we Republicans have been expressing these concerns, and I think our concerns are starting to be answered by the delay in the Senate and the fact that I don't think that this bill is going to get the votes to pass a House, even a House that has 81 more Democrats than Republicans. Joe?
Thank you. I'm Congressman Joe Barton of Texas. I'm the past chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I'm currently the senior ranking Republican member of that same committee. I have attended the majority of the COP conferences since Kyoto as an official member of the congressional delegation. Several points I'd like to make. First of all, to quote former President Ronald Reagan, no deal is better than a bad deal. I think it was clear in the body language this afternoon when President Obama spoke that he was somewhat upset that he was not able to fly in, hop off of Air Force One, work for a couple of hours and get an agreement that was acceptable to the entire international community. I respect the President. It's not his fault that he couldn't work his personal magic, and the reason he couldn't is because the goals are, if they're not irreconcilable, they are almost that. This whole process is based on the premise that mankind, through emissions of CO2, is causing the planet to warm at an unsustainable rate. That methodology, that theory, has never been independently analyzed or tested by any scientific group. The IPCC scientific group is a very insular, I don't want to be too impolite here, but they do not appear to be interested in finding the truth as much as they appear to be interested in protecting themselves and manipulating the data in a way that proves their preconceived conclusion. That is not the scientific method that I was taught in college. It should be apparent, given these emails that have come out in the last several weeks, that some of the leading proponents of climate change being caused by mankind have spent more time trying to hide their data sets, trying to manipulate and change their data, than they have been spending time trying to find out what the truth is. If there's anything that comes out of this conference, in my opinion, that's worthwhile, it should be the political leadership of the world, which almost without exception was assembled here today, should insist that we independently verify the model and the methodology and begin to question the theory. That's point number one. Point number two, there are those of us in the elected community in the United States that sincerely believe that if we work on a different model, a different goal, if we change the goal from some artificial reduction in CO2 that's not sustainable to a goal of developing a mechanism, whether multinationally or bilaterally, where we want to do the best we can to create economic prosperity for every citizen of the world community on a sustainable basis using existing plus new technology that is less carbon intensive and more energy efficient, that is a goal that everybody can buy into, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of where you are in the world. And the President of the United States at a future conference could come in and sign an agreement that was acceptable. So the fact that there's not an agreement coming out of this, apparently, is not a bad outcome. We need to reassess, in my opinion, the science, the models, and at least determine at the political level what the goal should be. And if that happens, then this has been a very successful conference. Would like to turn to Fred Upton now, senior member of the Energy and Commerce Committee from Michigan and the subcommittee ranking member.
Well, thank you, Joe. As Joe said, I'm Fred Upton, the top Republican on the Energy and Environment Subcommittee. My impression of being here these last couple of days is I don't know what kind of magic they can pull off to get the rabbit out of the hat. I really don't. The underdeveloped countries want more than $100 billion, and China says only voluntary and no verification. That just doesn't work. There's a reason why the Senate has not passed or even begun to consider the Waxman-Markey bill, which passed more than 6 months ago in the House. They simply don't have the votes to get that done. In my state, in Michigan, well, across the country in the United States, we've lost 1 in 5 manufacturing jobs over the last 2 years, 1 in 5. In Michigan, where we've had unemployment that has exceeded 15% for more than the last year, almost half of the jobs lost in America have come just from my state. The cap-and-trade scheme will raise utility prices, electric prices, by perhaps as much as 40%, and the price of gasoline by almost $1 a gallon. Either one of those two will just be a dagger trying to see our economy begin to recover. It's just not going to happen. So we'll see what happens here in terms of the final communique that's done either tonight or tomorrow. But I would also predict that at least in this Congress, which includes next year, you're not going to see any bill like the Waxman-Markey bill begin to move down the track.
Thank you. My name is Shelley Moore Capito. I represent the 2nd District of West Virginia, and I serve on the Select Committee of Energy Independence and Global Warming. Basically, my perspective here is I represent an energy state in our country. 98% of our electricity in our state is generated by coal, and we are the 2nd largest coal-producing state in the United States. And when I look at the Waxman-Markey bill and the cap-and-trade scheme, I see enormous job losses in our state, in the heartland, in Fred's area, in my area, while we're struggling with high unemployment right now and struggling to meet the demands of a recession, this kind of energy tax, this kind of tax on our manufacturing jobs, this kind of attack on using coal as a common sense domestic resource that we have in abundance in our country is, I think, could really strike a blow to a lot of us. So one of the reasons I have great difficulty with this bill is I believe it picks winners and losers in our own country. And I think that's why you see, and this was alluded to in some of the meetings earlier today, you see a lot of regional differences on people that can support the bill and people that can't. And some of those strike party line, a lot of it is party line, but then a lot of it are the regional differences that I explained what kind of difficulties that we would have in my home state, but also across the middle of the heartland. I'd like to see us move to the innovation and technology solutions to greater emissions. In my own congressional district, the Department of Energy just announced a enormous grant to the AEP electrical utility for a huge CCS and carbon sequestration demonstration project. I'd like to see this as the way that we use our abundant resources, make them cleaner, and have more of a common sense approach to this where we can then bridge to the greener jobs. And I've heard this since I've been here too. What about green jobs? Green jobs are great. We want green jobs. We want green jobs in addition to the jobs that we have now. We have had a huge job loss, as Fred mentioned in his particular region, but across our country. And so green jobs are things that we're cultivating in our own individual areas, but we want to be able to maintain the jobs that we have both in the energy sector and in the manufacturing sector. And the bill that was passed would kill a lot of those jobs and I think cause us great difficulties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Sullivan. I'm from the state of Oklahoma. And I agree with my colleagues here that the Waxman-Markey bill, a cap-and-trade scheme, is not going to work. You know, it's in this. It barely got through, like Chairman Barton said. It barely got through the House, and it's being bogged down the Senate right now for the reason is that our economy is suffering in the United States. Unemployment is very high. People are losing jobs. And if this bill in its current form went into effect, we would lose about 4.7 million jobs in the United States of America. And that's just unacceptable to the American people. Also setting up some kind of scheme to auction off credits is, with the Wall Street debacle that's gone on, is just also unacceptable. We need to do things like adapt technology, like others have said, looking at, like Shelley Moore Capito said, carbon sequestration, looking at using natural gas as a fuel for vehicles. Right now in the United States, one of the ways we can reduce carbon emissions is using more natural gas vehicles. We have about 150,000 natural gas vehicles in the United States, and there's about 10 million around the world. We need to do that. We use about 21 million barrels of oil a day in the United States, and about 69% of that is refined into transportation fuel. Right now in Congress, we've all supported a bill. It's passed through the House, in the Senate now, to get more research and development on the natural gas vehicles, getting it targeted towards fleets like buses, trucks. A garbage truck, for instance, displaces 325 cars. So we want to focus more on that, reducing emissions, and that's the way we need to do it, not by imposing a carbon cap regime on American people. This conference has been very interesting to me. I've never been to a world conference, and I think it's exciting to be here. I've learned a lot, but you know, I hope that everyone else will learn something from this. I don't think anything beneficial is going to come from it, as some kind of treaty will be signed. I don't think that can happen, because anything that we do right now has to involve developing nations as well. They have to be responsible for the emissions that they put out, and they're not wanting to. Right now, too, they're basing it on science that's fraudulent. There is a culture of corruption that is going through the scientific community that's not being addressed right now, and it should be. And we certainly should not be basing any treaty on corrupt data that this culture of corruption has permeated through. And so I think that we all should learn from this, go forward back to our respective countries, and come up with different ways to address this issue.
Marcia.
Thank you. I'm Marcia Blackburn from Tennessee's 7th Congressional District, and I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I serve with Ranking Member Barton there, and then at the Select Committee on Energy, Environment, and Global Warming, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner. I think it's probably obvious that we are all for clean air, clean water, and clean energy. We are just not for taxing people out of their house, home, and business in order to get there. And the American people will tell you that they don't have much of an appetite for seeing increased taxes levied on them in order to pay for legislation like the Waxman-Markey legislation. And they want to make certain that we are very careful not to implement those additional taxes. Another thing that they will tell you is that they want to make certain that we are incentivizing our way to lower carbon emissions, to cleaner air, clean water, and cleaner energy, and that we are not punishing people to clean water, clean air, and clean energy. And you know, there's a way to get there by going through incentives. I will highlight a couple of things for you. We have Senator Alexander and Senator Webb, bipartisan bill in the Senate that would be 100 new nuclear plants over the next 20 years. Now, this would be a very good step for us and globally a very good step. They have some good points in that legislation that would make it easier to build these facilities. You have heard Congresswoman Capito talk a little bit about clean coal technologies, and those are there. Innovators have much of that in place. The natural gas vehicles that Congressman Sullivan just mentioned, an important step for us, and we want to make certain that those incentives are there. Now, Congressman Sensenbrenner mentioned intellectual property protections. If all these great ideas are going to be brought forward, if all these innovators, many of them who are Americans, many of them who are Tennesseans, are going to be able to bring those ideas to the marketplace, they have to make certain that they're going to be compensated for those ideas that they have developed. We are wanting to encourage those intellectual property protections, and we feel like through incentives we will work our way to cleaner air, cleaner water, cleaner energy.
We're now ready to take questions. I think we have microphones available. If you wish to ask a question, if you would stand up and we'll get a microphone, acknowledge your organization and who you wish to answer your question. We'll start with this young lady right up here on the front.
Hello, I'm Sean Williams from Euromoney. I've got a question for everyone, really. The Waxman-Markey bill so far will allow speculators in the market as well as hedgers, whereas the Cantwell-Collins bill bans hedge funds and speculators. I just wanted to hear your views as to whether speculators would be good if a cap-and-trade market were introduced, or whether it could be detrimental to the market, in your view?
The answer to that question is very clear, no. It wouldn't be good. With the market on carbon offset credits in the EU has had wide fluctuations up and down, and if it started in the United States, I think the same thing would happen. There would be many unscrupulous speculators there, but if we're looking at investment, nobody is going to invest something that would have a wide gyration in what the value of that investment would be. I think that this shows that the entire construct of cap-and-trade legislation, as well as the offsets that were authorized in the Kyoto Treaty, is wrong. And I believe that one of the reasons why this conference has been so frustrating to many people around the world, including some of the chiefs of state that spoke here earlier today, is that basically the world is stuck with the Kyoto framework, and the Kyoto framework hasn't worked. Now, there was a lot of blame placed on the United States that the United States never ratified Kyoto. I would point out that even though President Clinton signed the treaty, he did not send it to the United States Senate for ratification. And I think he realized that if he had done that, it would have been voted down in the U.S. Senate. President Obama's negotiator, Todd Stern, has been consistently stating that the United States is not going to deceive people by the administration making promises they cannot deliver on. And some people have been listening, others have not, and all should be listening to what has happened in history as well as what Mr. Stern is saying.
This young lady right here. And then we'll go to the gentleman in front of you.
Thank you. Kimbria Badenhausen with Sea Change Radio. I'd like to ask two questions of each one of you, and if you wouldn't mind, because it is radio, please state your name and then tell me, number one, whether you believe in anthropogenic climate change, either yes or no, and if you've taken some time while you were here to speak to members of Tuvalu or the Maldives or some of the islands that are actually now feeling the effects of climate change. So whether you believe in anthropogenic climate change and whether you've spoken to anyone from a small island nation.
Jim Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin. I was more of a believer in anthropogenic climate change before the emails from the climate change unit in the East Anglia University in the UK came out than afterwards. It seems to me that the questions that have been posed by those emails becoming public are going to have to be answered and answered objectively. And so far the scientific community has circled the wagons and said, well, even if all that stuff ended up being fudged numbers, the science is still conclusive. Prove it to us.
I'm Joe Barton of Texas. I do not believe that the theory of anthropogenic climate change has been proven. And based somewhat on what Mr. Sensenberg just said, I think it's going to be very difficult to prove it. I think they need to develop a theory that more fits the facts. I have not spoken with any of the representatives of the nations that you ask. At this, I have at previous conferences, but not at this one.
Fred Upton from Michigan. I don't think any of us had had any interaction. Well, we've had a very short schedule here and are leaving soon to go back. I would just say I wanted to develop, I think that we can lower our emissions. We can do it with nuclear, we can do it with clean coal, we can do it with more conservation, a whole better appliances. We can do it on a whole host of things, and I think the world will be a lot better off if we can do that, and we can do that without cap and trade.
I have had no conversations. Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, and I believe, like my colleague from Michigan, that arguing the science, I really think solutions is what we need to talk about, and that's what I've been focusing on with my clean coal technology and other innovations in technologies.
John Sullivan from Oklahoma, and I haven't spoken to any of the countries from the island nations, and I think right now it's very tough to, how could anyone make a decision whether it's occurring or not? When there's so much fraudulent data out there, we've seen this corruption, this culture of corruption in the scientific community. I don't think anyone can come to any conclusion whether it's real or not. And until we can see sound science that's truthful, I don't think anyone can make a decision based on that.
Marcia Blackburn from Tennessee, and no, I do not believe it's a settled science. And I have not had the opportunity to visit with any of the countries that you mentioned.
I might point out that just the basic theory, CO2 is a trace gas in the atmosphere. If the volume of the atmosphere were equivalent to a United States football field, which is 100 yards long or 300 feet long, CO2 would make up about an eighth of an inch of that field. The dominant greenhouse gas is water vapor. The dominant temperature regulator, as based on what we know about the science, is cloud formation. The CO2 theory doesn't appear to take that into effect. Yes, sir.
Hi, Clayton McCluskey of the Dallas Morning News. Two questions. One, when it comes to the U.S. delegation here is very much hampered because they can't, as you said, promise things that they can't deliver on. Do you worry that because Congress won't support a bill that they're tying the American delegation's hands here to be a leader on this issue? And two, when it comes to the science, the Texas state climatologist told me just yesterday, this is the guy appointed by then Governor Bush, that for Texas, global warming is an issue and that we shouldn't be arguing about the science, but arguing about solutions. I was just wondering what kind of solutions you would see, and are you for lowering carbon emissions?
Well, you're looking at me, so I assume you want me to answer the question.
Representative Barton, please.
Since you're from Texas, and I am too. First of all, the science is a fair question. I respect the Texas climatologist, but it's hot in Texas in the summer, and it's cold in Texas in the winter, and I can't tell that that's going to change much one way or the other. We don't have an ice cap in Texas. Last I spoke, we do have ice storms sometime. So, before we make a policy decision, I think it's a fair question to try to develop a theory that appears to more fit the facts than this theory appears to be doing. And what was your other question? You had two.
Yeah, is the U.S. delegation of their hands tied? Yeah, the world's turned to the U.S. and is wanting U.S. to lead.
We have an obligation. Each of us represents a specific constituency, but generically, as the minority party in the House and the Senate, we have an obligation to insist on accountability of the majority. And as Congressman Sensenbrenner pointed out, the cap-and-trade bill, the Waxman-Markey bill, in spite of an 81-seat voting majority in the House, I think it passed by 5 or 6 votes, 7 votes. In committee, it passed by 3 votes, 31 to 28. So it's there are probably more people in America that believe as we believe than believe as Mr. Markey, Mr. Waxman, and our President believes, and we have an obligation to represent those views and insist that before we take the U.S. economy through the drastic measures required by Waxman-Markey, that there be a little bit more analysis of the underlying concept.
Well, let me chime in on this. Some people say the science is settled. Some people say the science is not settled. What is conclusive is the economics. And Waxman-Markey is a huge exporter of jobs. Every analysis indicates that there will be millions of jobs lost. And I come from the state that has the second highest percentage of total employment in manufacturing. The manufacturing sector of the American economy ends up being absolutely crippled, because if you have huge increases in energy costs, then American manufacturing cannot be competitive with China and India, where they have lower energy costs and definitely lower wage and personnel costs. So this is a question of whether we have a manufacturing base in our country and the jobs that go with it. And I think all of us agree here that the economics are conclusive and terrible as far as the American economy and American workers are concerned.
This young lady right here. Yes, ma'am. And then the gentleman. We'll go to you and then to that gentleman. And then we'll come out there.
Thanks. Kate Shepard with Mother Jones Magazine.
Please stand up.
Sorry,
we want to get you on camera so you'll look good on camera.
Two-part question. One, this is both for Representative Barton and Representative Sullivan. You suggest that the science is corrupted and the scientific community is corrupted, and you're suggesting that there should be more study. I'm wondering if you think the community is corrupted, who should conduct those studies, and how an appropriate way for addressing that. And secondly, I'm kind of wondering what you think the specific motivation is for this number of scientists around the world who have said that this is a problem and they think it's something that should be addressed. What do you think that they and all the people who are gathered here stand to get out of it?
I didn't use the word corrupt. I'll let Mr. Sullivan comment on that. I have a list of excerpts from the emails before me. When they talk about using tricks, when they talk about suppressing data, when they talk about trying to get individuals that disagree with them removed from their positions, when they talk about they don't want to comply with Freedom of Information Act, and they come up with various schemes to not release their modeling and their data sets, I think it's fair to question the science. And these are not junior outliers. This is Dr. Michael Mann, who's the originator of the hockey stick theory, which we have proven was incorrect. It used manipulated data. This is Dr. Phil Jones, who was head of the CRU at East Anglia University. These are senior officials at NOAA and NASA in the United States. And as I said in my opening statement, there has really never been an independent assessment of the methodology or of the data that goes into making some of these conclusions. And it is, I think, extremely disingenuous to expect the political establishment that was assembled here today to take at total face value conclusions and assumptions based on the methodology that's been so far presented. As to who should do that independent assessment, there are any number of respected institutions, National Academy of Sciences, I'm sure there are international bodies. I would hope it would not be done through the United Nations, since they're responsible for the current IPCC. But if you get credible scientists who have an open mind and have the background, not just in climatology, but in statistics and analysis and various other professions, I would accept their conclusions. Mr. Sullivan?
I agree with what Joe's saying, and I do believe it's corrupted the process. It's corrupt. And I think the best way to address it is have an investigation. We need to investigate this. We need to have somebody go through all these emails, talk to these people, take it to the proper authorities, and have it investigated, because look at what's at stake here. And that's why I think it's ridiculous for any of us to enter into any kind of binding treaty when we have this kind of corrupted information out there, this corrupted data. And I think the reason it happened, I think that was another part of your question, is money. I think financial reasons.
This will have to be our last question because they're telling us 3 minutes.
If not scientists, who then is evaluating science on this?
No, we're not saying it shouldn't be scientists. It should just be scientists that actually use a scientific method and are independent and don't have a vested interest financially in the outcome. This gentleman here, and unfortunately, that'll have to be our last question.
Hi, Glenn Thrush with Politico. Just a bit of housekeeping. Mr. Upton and Ms. Capito, did you answer the question with regard to whether or not you believed in man-made climate change? I don't recall hearing the answer to that. Just a...
We're going to leave our answer, I think, the way that it is. I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of the science. I think that's very important to do. I'm not sure that we're there yet, but regardless, I think it's in our best interest to, in fact, reduce emissions, and we can do that as a nation.
So would you describe yourself as agnostic on that?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. Ms. Capito?
I think my colleague's answer is very good, but I'll go and say that I do believe we need to investigate the emails. This has a huge impact on the area where I live that I think I explained a lot. I do believe that sheer population growth in this world has me believe that emissions are higher and therefore there's more being emitted.
So my actual question, is the political implication of this. There's a lot of House Democrats who are angry at the Senate because they have had to take a vote that the Senate has not had to take. Just very briefly, what do you think the political implications of the summer vote in the House will be for the Democratic majority?
There'll be some Democrat members who don't come back because their arm was twisted by Speaker Pelosi and her team to vote for what I think is a very fatally flawed bill. If you have questions, if you'll submit them in writing to our Lisa Miller or others, we will try to get you a written answer. We apologize for not being able to.
Let me just say, piggyback on your
time is
question.
up, but they've just told us our time is
for
up.
one second. Joe and I were the two deputy whips back in the 90s responsible for all of the Republicans. This bill, Waxman-Markey, passed by 7 votes. Switch 4, it goes the other way. I'm convinced that if you had the vote today, it would lose by 50 votes.
I agree with you.
I can tell you a good number of Democrats that wished that they had voted no after voting yes. This bill is dead in the water the way that it is today, and that's why it's dead on arrival over in the Senate.
Yeah, thank you for your attendance today.